Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The US presidential election campaign 2024 is getting more and more intense with every single passing day. This intensity doesn't owe to the enthusiasm of the voters or the supporters of either of the two candidates, nor does it has to do anything with either of the candidates presenting better plans as compared to the other, which resonate with the public well. This particular presidential election campaign is in fact turning out to be dangerously critical, and we have seen two back-to-back assassination attempts targeting former US President Donald Trump, and he is the Republican candidate for these elections. Now, in this latest assassination attempt, the suspect has been taken into custody and is being investigated. We'll be talking about who that suspect happens to be, his affiliation, his support to the war in Ukraine. What does that basically signify and mean at this particular moment when the US presidential elections are drawing closer? Also, for a fact, we know that the earlier assassination attempt in Pennsylvania led to the resignation of the director of the Secret Service. What this particular assassination attempt is going to lead up to, that naturally has raised some very serious questions regarding the role and the responsibility of the Secret Service. We'll also be taking the analysis regarding that. And also, we'll try to understand what sort of an impact these back-to-back assassination attempts on Donald Trump would have on his election campaign and overall a presidential election campaign, and any sort of an effect on the outcome of this presidential race. Also, we'll be trying to understand, is a new pattern developing as far as the politics in the United States of America is concerned, and if yes, who gains from it? Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests. We are joined in the studio by Mr. JauharSaleem, former Foreign Secretary and currently serving as the President at the Institute of Regional Studies. Mr. Saleem, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Mohammed Shoaib, Foreign Affairs expert. Mr. Shoaib, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. We'll be joined by another participant in the show later, and I'll be introducing them as they join in. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Saleem. Now, these two back-to-back assassination attempts on one candidate for the upcoming presidential election in the United States of America. Let's begin with the role and the responsibility of the Secret Service. What is this Secret Service for the general understanding of the common masses? How does it actually operate? And what happens to the responsibility? Does its responsibility increase manifold when it comes to the election cycle just before the commencement of the presidential elections?
Yeah. Secret Service is primarily responsible for security of VVIPs such as the US President or presidential candidates and other sort of former presidents and so on. It's a very organized and highly trained group of officers, sometimes taken from other agencies, or but they're very highly trained. Now, what we've seen here is these two attempts, but these are different. In the first attempt, there was actually a shot fired. The shots fired, which actually even brushed former President Trump's one of his ears, and they say that if he hadn't just moved his head a bit, it could have been lethal. This particular instance, this is a potential assassination attempt because no shots were fired. In fact, the only shots fired were by the Secret Service at the person who was hiding in some plants, in some shrubs. And that is, where was that? That was at the Trump International golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida, something that Trump owns. Now, this person, Ryan Rout, has a very interesting background. He was actually a Trump supporter. He voted for Trump in 2016 elections, it appears. And he owns a construction firm. But at the same time, he has been very very much involved, very much committed to the war against Russia in Ukraine. And he had been trying, apparently, to recruit people for that, or at least trying to inspire people to join that cause. So they're checking more details of his backgrounds, but apparently he got disgruntled when he felt that Trump was taking a very contrarian stance on Ukraine, rather pro-Russian stance. So that probably that made him switch his loyalties, and he turned against Trump. Now, as more details emerge, it will be clear what exactly he wanted. But he did have a gun, apparently, a pretty and some the scopes as well, the telescopes with that, and so he had the potential to have fired some lethal shots. Now, having said that.
So that's a very important point that you've just raised. We'll go and try to delve deeper into that particular aspect also. There is a condemnation by the Ukrainian president also. Likewise, there is a statement that has been issued by the Kremlin, by Dmitry Peskov, saying playing with fire leads to consequences. We'll be talking in detail regarding that particular aspect. Firstly, when we specifically talk about the role and the responsibility of the Secret Service. So, as you already mentioned, that they are very well trained, and they are deputed on the duty for very, very important people.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to this particular second assassination attempt, earlier we saw the first assassination attempt actually led to those hearings at the Senate, ultimately leading into the resignation of the director. After that, what does this second assassination attempt actually depict about Secret Service?
No, first of all, what it depicts is that there are people who are now very much against Trump, and some of those were probably his erstwhile loyalists. And because the type of supporters he has, these are people who own in America. Literally everybody owns guns, and the type of guns they own, they can own very lethal guns with a lot of high-tech gadgets as well. So that is one thing. It makes the role of Secret Service very difficult. It's unlike other countries, for instance, in Europe, where that is not the case, or even Canada and other countries. The second thing is, in the first assassination attempt, there were several lapses by the Secret Service. That person was able to climb a certain tower, and then he was visible to a lot of people who were seeing what he was doing, but the Secret Service couldn't, and then the fact that he was able to reach that position and and he was able to fire shots, So it was in some ways it was like literally a comedy of errors on the part of Secret Service. Although to their
that was accepted by the acting director also.
Exactly, and there were resignations, like you said. But this time around it was different, because this is a property owned by Trump. Okay, Secret Service. We all know that when you have VVIPs like that, they're supposed to have a certain amount of surveillance, and they're also supposed to beforehand scan everything, and clear it in terms of security. That happens even.
So in this particular case, also one of their agents actually, who was trying to secure ahead of Trump, actually identified that barrel that was visible in the shrubs, right?
Yeah. In this particular case, that happened. But the fact is that it could have probably happened earlier, because at that point in time, Trump was already there. So this should not have happened. So there's a slight lapse, but it doesn't compare, in any way to what happened in the first assassination attempt. So
let's see. Right, this time the performance of the Secret Service was way better as compared to the last.
Definitely.
Okay, let me take this very point to Mr. Mohammed Shoaib. Mr. Shoaib, when we talk about, as you have heard Mr. Saleem saying that this time it seems that this performance by the Secret Service was way better as compared to the last time, when there was actually a fire shot by the suspect. Now, when we talk about the vicinity or the proximity at which this particular suspect came, don't you think that also naturally raises some serious questions that how could somebody get so closer to a presidential race candidate? Shouldn't there be a wider responsibility of the Secret Service in securing the presidential nominee?
So when we look at the US politics and the way people carry guns, or because they carry guns as their constitutional right, you cannot really cordon off areas. And because the presidential nominees, they are popular people, they have to intermingle with the people, they have to wave toward the people. So they want to be close to the people. So Secret Service cannot really keep these presidential nominees or
what about the private
VVIPs away
property?
from the
I mean,
people.
does that logic hold when it comes to private property? I mean, it should be properly secured. I mean, when you are within your private property and you are engaged in some private activities, right? Playing golf, for example. So in this particular instance, so naturally the presidential nominee doesn't want to be closer to the people at that particular moment.
But the thing is that since he's a presidential candidate, you are wherever he is moving, you are securing the premises.
Right.
You do not know that he would move toward the right or toward the left. And President Trump, we all know he is not a man who will share his plan beforehand. So Secret Service just remains a step ahead of the president, and wherever he moves, they would secure the premises.
Okay.
And this time, when they were trying to secure the premises, they found out the person. That means they have done their job. But the way US politics is today, and the way the people can carry the guns, it's very, very difficult to secure the premises or cordon off the area, and you do not allow anyone to even enter the premises. Perhaps that is an easier part to do. But if you are just going a step ahead of the president, that's a difficult part. But still, we have to appreciate the Secret Service because they were really able to apprehend the person before he could do anything.
Okay, so when we talk about the kind of politics you just mentioned the United States of America is having right now, do we see a similar sort of a pattern from history also, especially when it comes to the election cycle just before the presidential elections? Do you see any sort of pattern in the past from the history or the politics in the United States of America, or is it altogether a new pattern that is developing?
It's perhaps it also can be found in history because President Lincoln, when he was at his peak and he had almost won the Civil War, he was assassinated. Then there was another president, William McKinley, he was also assassinated. Then we all know about John F. Kennedy, he was assassinated. Then President Ronald Reagan was also shot at, but he survived the attempt. President Trump, he has also survived an attempt. This happens in the United States. At least 3 or 4 presidents have already been killed and many have been shot at. So this is something usual in the US history.
So when we try to connect with the presidential election campaign, do we find any similar sort of incident in the past also?
President Reagan was attacked once, yes.
Right.
So there's an instance, and now we have 2 instances.
So, but we've clearly seen an increased frequency of such type of attempts. No, this time around.
But then in the recent past, we do not have example of people who love a presidential candidate or who hate a presidential candidate so much. Now people who vote for Donald Trump, they do not really affiliate themselves with the Republican Party. They call themselves Trump voters. Now the trend in United States politics is that in the midterm elections, those voters who call themselves Trump voters, they don't really show up because Trump is not contesting elections. But now in these elections, they would simply show up because they would vote Trump. They would not vote for Republican Party. So the logic of electoral politics tells us that when you have more lovers, then naturally you will have more haters. And the intents, the lovers are, the intents are going to be your haters.
So that was exactly the point I was about to ask you. Why Trump? 2 back-to-back assassination attempts, first in July and now in September. Why Donald Trump? Is it because of the reason that you just put forth, that the more supporters or the voters that you've got, the more intense haters you're likely to have. Is that so?
That can be a very solid reason, but still we have to look into the situation, what emerges later on, because the person who has been apprehended is still being investigated. So we still have to wait for details, but that could be a very solid reason. And then there's another situation. Most of the time, some people do these attempts just to become famous.
Just to become famous,
Yes.
and get caught and get into the custody, being investigated.
Actually, it has
Is that
happened.
worth it?
I mean, this can be a psychological problem, but there are instances in history when some people try to just to be popular, to be at the front,
Okay.
and made similar mistakes.
At the cost of no matter what. Okay, so let me take this point. Mr. Saleem, first, a historical patron, especially when we try to understand the dynamics of the politics just before the elections, and also why Donald Trump, back-to-back two assassination attempts within a span of less than 3 months. And the last, is it just because people just want to be popular? And they
No,
would
actually,
go to an extent like
This is
this?
an interesting point because, I mean, you see, like in Reagan's case, the person who shot Reagan was trying to either impress or sort of, like was doing it because of a woman that he liked, So, and he had nothing to do, no problem with Reagan as such. So it was a very different cause. So there could be all types of causes. We have to remember that Robert Kennedy was assassinated as well after John F. Kennedy. And so there are a lot of incidents in America, and he was a presidential candidate as well, I think there could be very many reasons why it's happening more to Trump, your point, rather than Kamala. The fact is, right now, the US politics is very polarized. That's one thing. The second thing is that the type of political rhetoric that Trump himself has brought to the elections, so that's saying that the chicken are coming home to roost, in some ways. Unfortunately, of course we sympathize with him, and like with any politician who would experience such a risk. But the fact is that he had been in the past exhorting his followers in certain instances to sort of like take actions which would not be within the sort of domain of sort of mainstream politics in the US, like what happened after he lost the elections, and and there's still cases in the courts about that, when a crowd charged on the Capitol Hill, and there was a lot of violence. Now the second thing is that it's the Trump supporters who are more gun owners, and it's basically the Republican Party, and particularly Trump, who has that kind of alliance with the National Rifle Association, which is very powerful in America, and and who talk about gun rights and everything. And despite a lot of rampages that have happened in the U.S., just this year there over almost 300 rampages so far, when people mass shootings. Despite that, nobody has been able to take corrective measures. Why? Because Republicans are so kind of they're so committed on that. And so this is what happens sometimes, because if you preach a certain type of politics, then you also increase the risk for yourself.
Right.
But having said that, that doesn't mean that. And the second, and also another thing, Trump is more involved in these type of rallies. He loves this. He loves showmanship, but he also loves to be amongst his supporters. And he has been in the type of rallies where you have tens of thousands of people, and he likes, as has been mentioned by Shoaib as well, he likes to be sort of
So why would Kamala call his rallies boring? That's interesting.
Yeah, you see, that's very interesting, because that was a tactic, and it worked. That
To put him off guard?
putting off guard. That was a trap, basically.
Okay.
It was basically a bait.
Was it?
Yeah, and Trump took it.
Did it work? Okay.
It worked, because after that, Trump basically just went off track, and and I think Kamala, because I saw the whole debate, that debate had been very well planned. It was totally scripted on Kamala's part. She did not deviate from the script. She was very well prepared, and and she just stuck to her message, and stuck to the And even the plans, it was very clear that even the attacks on Trump, some of the attacks there had been planned, and she executed them meticulously. On the other hand, Trump, 2 or 3 times when he was baited in that debate, one was that, another time when he started talking about, those, like some illegal immigrants,
Yes,
eating cats and dogs and
Yeah.
pets of people, and said, so those type of rants unfortunately hurt him.
So he got trapped into those baits. That's why, do you think that he didn't agree for another presidential debate?
Yeah, it's obvious, because he used to relish debates, and he would he was the one who used to challenge others to debates.
There was a perception that he would decimate the other.
Exactly,
Okay,
and he
so,
had done so well always.
Let me bring another participant in the show. We are honored to be joined on the phone line Dr. Zainab Ahmed, Chairperson, Department of International Relations, Lahore Garrison University. Dr. Zainab, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. This second assassination attempt on the life of Donald Trump, after which we have seen both President Joe Biden and the presidential Democratic nominee Kamala Harris condemning this, expressing satisfaction and a relief that former President Donald Trump is safe. Kamala Harris saying violence has no place in America. When we talk about the connection of violence and politics in America, is it an established pattern, or do we see altogether a new pattern developing?
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me, Jawad?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, I think as far as this incident is concerned, it's not very different from the previous incidents, and it's the pattern and according to exact psychology of President Trump, as he has been playing with the psychology of his voters. He had lost some ground after the last presidential debate, and during the last polls also, Kamala was able to gain some strength, rather considerable strength as compared to President Trump. So he needed this kind of incident. I'm not insinuating that whether it was staged or it was actual, but I do believe that it may have some kind of impact, bringing him back to the public. And we need to understand that most of his voters are in Midland America, and they are usually the white supremacists, and they are more associated with a rural lifestyle in America, the Midland America. So he may have some advantage over there. Secondly, two important facts are associated with this.
Dr. Zainab, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. You, of course, clarified that you don't imply that you don't think that this could be a staged one, but of course, it might have a significant impact as far as the regaining popularity or giving that momentum to former President Donald Trump's campaign is concerned. What about the first assassination attempt? That was quite a narrow escape.
I think that gave him some ground which he lost in the presidential campaign. And now he has also refused to come for the second presidential campaign with VP Kamala Harris. And one important fact with this particular incident is that it is being associated, the shooter is being associated with, as a sympathizer of Ukraine war, which he openly says that he would be rolling out. So this tries to this is an attempt to give him some ground and sell back something to his voters, that he would be rolling back all the program of Ukraine war. And that will be a terrible idea for the Americans to keep on continue with the war. So he will again try to sell this. And another very interesting fact is that his VP candidate, J.D. Vance, he is trying to attack the immigrants, that immigrants are eating the pets. So these kinds of tactics, and if we look at the pattern of these tactics, they are about emphasizing on the facts on which his entire campaign is based. That is to pull out the U.S. of Ukraine war, and number two, to to hit the immigrants, anti-immigrant campaign. So in any way, he is trying to bring the attention of his voters, and I don't think he has lost actually the voter he had. And one thing we should also remember that in the last election also he lost the popular vote. He was able to win the electoral college. So that's something we need to put our focus upon, that he
If he has actually lost the voters this time around, to what core reasons do you associate that phenomenon of losing the voters as far as Trump is concerned?
I think that as far as the credit of dividing the US people goes, it goes to Trump definitely. And the US is quite divided, broadly divided. And if there is any success comes for the Democrats or Kamala, that would not be very considerable success. I still believe that his voter ground is quite intact, and these all tactics, whatever they are going to impact his voter, and they will keep them intact behind him.
Dr. Zainab Ahmed, Chairperson, Department of International Relations, Lahore Garrison University, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show. Mr. Shoaib, when we talk about any possibility, as Dr. Zainab talked about, could there be any sort of a chance? Well, let's compare both of these assassination attempts. The first narrowly escaped. This one, the suspect caught beforehand, before he could actually lodge that shot that could prove to be either way. So, comparing both of these assassination attempts, she of course clarified that she doesn't imply that it could be a staged one. By any chance, could there be any possibility that it could be staged to just get that effect back, that popularity back, to gain that momentum as far as the election campaign is concerned?
That could be a possibility. I mean, we cannot simply say no to possibilities, but I don't really think so. Such actions or such gambles can work in a US presidential election, because whoever the person is, we will hear a lot of things about him in a day or so. So such a thing will not survive for next 2 months, which the Republican Party of course needs. So even if it was a staged attempt, it won't really matter.
It won't really matter.
Yes.
So don't you think these back-to-back assassination attempts are going to lead to get that sympathy towards Donald Trump and could lead to a considerable increase in the sympathy votes?
It depends, I mean, who we are talking about, because if we have to see it as an assassination attempt, I think the first one was sufficient. Okay. And if there was any sympathy vote coming in Trump's way, it could have come earlier. Right. And secondly, we'll have to look at the numbers in the United States, people who affiliate themselves with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Such people, they do not really change their political affiliations very easily. I mean, it also happens in other countries. But certain things can matter about the undecided voters, but over the years the undecided voter percentage in the United States is decreasing. So now there is more partisanship in the country, and a bigger percentage of voters, they are already affiliated with the political parties.
Okay, so it's not going to have any considerable impact.
Yes, and if it has a considerable impact, there are actually 2.5 months between the attempt and the elections. So that impact will be reduced by other actions and other episodes as well.
Okay, Mr. Saleem, your understanding. Do you think this second assassination attempt on life of Donald Trump might have a considerable effect as to the momentum of this election campaign is concerned, and at the end of the day, on the outcomes of the elections?
I mean, it could have some effect, a temporary one, although I would say, well, the timing is pretty conspicuous. Of course, you know, happening just after the debate, when sort of, you know, like everybody thought he did really poorly compared to Kamala Harris. And he started trailing in the polls after that. He was trailing in the poll before that as well, slightly, ever so slightly. But he was gradually going back up, you know, like the difference had been just, because I had been keeping a track of the polling averages. So the polling averages was like, it was almost less than 1% difference between, and Kamala was leading. And in the most recent polls, it was a dead heat. But after this debate, suddenly I saw a lot of polls where the difference was 3, 4, 5 points between the two candidates. And the average of polls increased to like 1.7%. So in that way, the timing is conspicuous. But on the other hand, it could be very risky. If somebody would come up with some conspiracy theory, then the fact is that, if somebody would stage that, and American media, as we know, and sort of, it's a pretty sharp media, and, and the infrastructure is very sophisticated. So if actually it is proven by any chance that there was a staged attempt, that would destroy a candidate's chances of winning the election. So it would be unlikely for a candidate to take that type of a risk. Now, on the other hand, what is happening in the election? You see the difference between the two candidates even right now. After all this, the debate debacle, I would call it, on Trump's part. Even so, it is just sort of 1.7% in terms of the poll average. Now that is, on the one hand, it's within the margin of error, as they call it. But on the other hand, again, the point that was mentioned before, which I have mentioned in my previous commentaries as well, the fact is that the Democrats need at least 2% more votes to win this election, because of the fact that the electoral college in America is skewed in favor of Republicans, because Republicans generally win in the smaller states. And in the smaller states, the number of electors as a percentage of the population of those states is bigger, So like California, it does not have as many electors as it should, compared to Minnesota, for instance, if we just compare the populations. So because of that, Republicans can lose, they can very easily, a difference of about 3 million votes, even up to even probably 3.5 million votes, could easily be covered by them, So they could actually very easily poll 1.5% less vote than the Democrats and still win the elections. But it's the 2% barrier which then becomes decisive. In the last elections, the difference was 6 million votes. In the 2016 elections, Hillary Clinton actually got 3 million more votes, but still lost the election. Al Gore also lost the election, although he polled millions of more votes than George Bush. So that has been happening. So because of that, I would say the election is still, it's still very open. Okay, the election is on the 5th of November. So it's a month and 20 days left now, but still it's a very decisive time. And and 50 days is a long term in politics, particularly when you're talking about a presidential election in America. So what I would say, and that's why Trump does not want to take a risk of another debate, because now that he knows that for him it would be very risky, because if he does well, okay, it would balance things out a bit. But on the other hand, if he does worse again, then that would destroy him. So he wouldn't take that risk. On the other hand, Kamala is also playing very safe. For instance, she hasn't been doing very many interviews. She only did one interview, and ever since major interview, ever since she became the main candidate, and that was also a very sort of restricted interview. And she's playing by the book, and she's following very clearly in the debate as well. She was following a script. She was following what she had been sort of practiced as well by that both sides, there are lots of experts. But the problem is that Trump, sometimes he loses the plot because he's very impulsive, Sometimes that helps him. He used to destroy candidates because of his natural instinct. But now people have sort of, because they've learned so much about him, then the strategists can come up with counter strategies. And this time we saw in the debate that the counter strategies worked really well. So I'd see, so this assassination attempt would not really have a great deal of impact on the elections. Now, in terms of issues now, you see, I think that is what becomes really important. One or two issues where Trump is actually facing some vulnerability is what? One is the abortion rights issue. On that, the problem for Trump is that, he has to keep his base happy on the one hand, which want sort of, like very strict kind of, like laws on that, like no abortion at all. But at the same time, he knows that a lot, he would lose a lot of women votes if he goes to that extent. So he's trying to kind of placate both the sides, and in trying to do that, he's actually lost, some votes of his sort of, of his hardcore support. Similarly, okay, immigration is a point, is a vulnerable area for the Democrats. And that is why, Kamala is treading so carefully on that, There are a couple of other issues. Okay, Ukraine, in American elections, the foreign policy issues are not taken as seriously by the electorate. Economy is a very important issue, That is a vulnerability for Kamala Harris, because, okay, things work very well, but then, there's one ad that they're playing, they've spent $38 million on playing just one ad where Kamala says, oh, this is Bidenomics. And then subsequent to that, there was inflation and there was some problems with sort of, like the economic policy. And then they say, okay, this is Bidenomics. Prices going up, inflation going up.
Unemployment.
Unemployment, slightly ticking up as well.
So what do you think were the reasons actually they couldn't give that boost to the economy, or the economy couldn't thrive actually under the Biden administration? What were the major causes of the failures?
No, generally the economy has held very well. The unemployment is at historic lows.
Okay.
Now, the only problem was that after this, the COVID era passed, there was inflation. Now, in America, you didn't have, the inflation at one point almost touched 10%, and then it came down. Their policies worked. But still, for Americans, that is something, it was a jolt for the Americans. So that is a vulnerability they have, economy, although it's now unemployment is still very low, inflation has come down and sort of, but still for Kamala to defend, and that is why, what you see a very clear trend, where now Kamala is trying to disassociate herself as much as possible from Biden's policies, because in this debate as well, she said, you're not contesting against Biden, you're contesting against me, So a very clear divide there. So it's a very interesting election. I think at this point in time, it would be very hard to predict, and this bump that Kamala is enjoying right now, in the coming days, we'll see how it plays out.
Right. Mr. Shoaib, when we talk about going back to that second assassination attempt, one dimension becomes very pronounced, an international dimension. We've seen the condemnation coming from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Also, the Kremlin issuing a statement with Dmitry Peskov saying, playing with fire leads to consequences. Now, there is a clear indication of the support for war in Ukraine by this particular suspect. How do you associate this particular connection of his support towards the war in Ukraine and the kind of distancing the Ukrainian officials have done with this particular suspect, saying we have nothing to do with him, or he has nothing to do with Ukraine or the conflict with Russia? And what about Dmitry Peskov's statement?
So this issue has two dimensions. First is personal dimension, and then there is international dimension. In personal dimension, there is a history between Ukrainian authorities and President Trump. So we know President Trump, when he was the president, he was demanding a certain favor from the Ukrainian officials in return of aid. So Ukrainians are cautious. They are also getting ready for a Trump presidency 2.0. So they clarified the situation.
What favors?
He was actually demanding certain things on Hunter Biden, who had some business links in Ukraine. So he was demanding information on President Biden's son in return of some aid to Ukraine. On the other hand, there's international dimension as well, because the Ukrainians, they have a very good idea that the Democrats, they are okay with NATO and with all the aid going to Ukraine, also plus accepting the international responsibility of the United States as a superpower, but they are not really certain about what President Trump is going to do when he wins the election. So that's why they have distanced themselves from this whole episode of assassination attempt. As for the Russians, I think Russians have done well. That's the only thing they should have done. By the way, they didn't have any other option. They should have given a statement, because we in the 2016 election, we have heard a lot about the the whole misinformation campaign, and also there's an understanding among the US people that Russians have support for President Trump. So they will be more favorable to President Trump, but so far they have distanced themselves from the whole episode.
Okay, so unfortunately we're short of time. I'll have to go back to Mr. Saleem. Mr. Saleem, this particular equation, how do you equate the statement, the condemnation, the distancing of the Ukrainian authorities from this particular suspect, also Kremlin issuing a statement?
Yeah, no, I think it's very clear, basically, that of course, Ukrainians, they wouldn't want to be seen as sort of, in any way linked with that person, or his endeavors in terms of what he's trying to do to recruit people to that cause. And the Russians, again, from the Russian side, we know that they favor Trump, but at the same time, it was very interesting that Putin said, "Oh, I endorse Kamala Harris," which was more of a joke, although he didn't say it in sort of, in that type of a tone. But the fact is that the Russians are just stating that, okay, which they have said as well. The spokesperson said recently, please don't involve us in your internal elections. Okay, so and this statement is in that direction as well. But the last thing that I would say is, all the American elections in recent history, or most of them, have come down to what is called the battleground states. Because they're Democrat states, the Reds, the blue states, and then the red states, the Republican states, and then there are purple states, which are the battleground states. Sometimes the election boils down to just one state, like when George W. Bush won. Even in the Hillary election, when she lost the election, it just came down to 2 or 3 states. So in this election as well, it's quite likely that election will eventually boil down to 2 or 3 battleground states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota.
Pretty quickly, do you think if Donald Trump loses, he's going to accept the results?
He's not going to accept the results.
Mr. JauharSaleem, former Foreign Secretary, President at the Institute of Regional Studies, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Mohammed Shoaib, Expert Foreign Affairs, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's interesting episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.